Welcome to the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. We've talked a lot about cyber security in the last couple of years, with cyber attacks unfortunately becoming a fact of life. In fiscal 2021, a new data breach was reported to the Australian Cyber Security Centre every 8 minutes. Last month, the rules changed around the reporting of breaches, with critical infrastructure organisations required to report attacks to the Australian Cyber Security Centre in less than 12 hours. The new reporting rules show just how seriously Australia is taking cyber risk. I wanted to find out what these changes mean for Australian businesses and what we know about the groups and nations behind the attacks. Adam Meyers is the Senior Vice President of Intelligence at CrowdStrike and joins me from Washington. Adam, welcome to Fear and Greed.
Thanks for having me.
You've got a cracking job heading up intelligence at CrowdStrike. Let's start with the latest from the digital frontline. Where's it coming from? Where are these attacks coming from?
Well, we track criminal groups from all over the world, probably about 60 so different criminal groups that we track. That said, there's lots of different types of criminal hustles out there. You have ransomware, which tends to be predominantly operating out of Eastern Europe, let's say in the vicinity of Russia. There's a lot of ecosystem around that. And I think a lot of people don't really understand that there's entire components of e-crime that operate to support other operations within e-crime. So as an example, a lot of people know about Emotet. We track Emotet as Mummy Spider. And Emotet, in addition to doing their own scams, is really focused on distribution. And so what that means is that they run spam operations and pay per install. And so other ransomware actors, and there's plenty of them out there, will go to the Emotet crew, the Emotet gang, via various underground forums and things of that nature. And they'll effectively contract them and do kind of it's almost like search engine optimization in a way, where they'll say, okay, we want to distribute this package, this payload, to as many victims as we can in Australia. Yep. And so then the Emotet gang will spin up their spam botnet. They'll target email addresses and organizations in Australia. And then they'll charge whoever it is X number of dollars or whatever it might be per install to drop their initial payload, their package.
So it's a real ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's people that focus on just the negotiation of the ransom. There are people that focus on helping launder the money and helping to cash out things. And so there's a whole ecosystem. In fact, we track it. If you look at our website, we have something called the Adversary Universe. And we've created this e-crime index. So if you're familiar with the Dow Jones Industrial Average, that was something that was created in the late 1800s to enable people to kind of get a sense of the overall health of the industrial economy. And so they take, back in 1899 or whatever it was, when Charles Dow came up with it, they came up with, I think, about a dozen or so different industrial companies, looked at their stock and kind of used an index of these 12 different companies to get a sense of the overall health of the industrial economy. When World War II ends, the Dow Jones goes up. When the energy crises in the 70s hit, the Dow goes down. When COVID, the pandemic, hit, it went down initially, but it came back up when people realized that we would figure out a way through it. And this whole index, which has changed over the years, they've added different stocks as textiles kind of gave way to computers and things like that. But this gives you a sense of the overall health of the economy. And so we created what we call the e-crime index, which tracks 34 different observables that we're able to see day in and day out from the underground economy, and gives us the ability to track the overall health of the underground economy. And when different holidays come around, we notice a fluctuation in this e-crime index. When there's a major ransomware event like the Colonial Pipeline, which got lots of attention last May, there was initially a drop-off right after that because all of the e-crime operators kind of pulled back. They didn't want to have this extra heat on them. So a lot of things kind of pulled back. A lot of things changed. There were some disruptions to the market. And so we've been kind of watching this in real time and have created this open model that people can go look at to see how it's changing.
So, I mean, the Dow Jones over time has always trended higher in the long term. It always trends higher. Is your index trending higher?
It's been relatively stable, but it's only about 2 years old. The Dow Jones has a solid 120 20 plus years, I think, on our index. And so I think and this is really interesting because we're seeing a major shift in the e-crime ecosystem today. And it'll be interesting in a year from now for us to get together and have this conversation and say, well, what did we learn based on this? Because what we're seeing now is ransomware is kind of giving way to data extortion. And a lot of the criminal actors that are out there, they started hearing from their victims that they weren't going to pay. They had backup solutions in place, and they weren't gonna pay these different actors to get their data back. And so they had to pivot. They had to change how they were doing things. And what we started seeing about 2 or 3 years ago was what a lot of people will call a double extortion, where they were running a ransomware operation and they were stealing data. And they would charge you one price to get your crypto keys to decrypt your files and a different price to just not have your data get leaked to the internet. And as more and more organizations are saying, we're not paying for ransom, we're starting to see this shift. And it's happening right now in real time. We're seeing more threat actors that are kind of eschewing the traditional ransomware tools and are more focused on the data extortion. They're looking at ways to optimize the stolen data so that people can search through it much easier, which brings more pain to the victim.
Yep.
And because of all the legal and regulatory frameworks that we're putting in place here in the US, we've got the California Privacy Act, and there's 50 different states here that are all probably going to enact their own privacy act. We've got GDPR out of Europe. There's across the globe, all of these different privacy regimens coming into play. And when a global company gets data extorted and that data gets leaked to the internet if they don't pay, the compliance and the regulatory fees are astronomical.
Okay, it's a really good point. It seems to me that the criminals are ahead of the curve, at least when it comes to, because if someone has their data stolen and then you run into privacy issues because of legislation, it seems just a bit unfair. I mean, maybe you should be in trouble for allowing your data to be stolen, but still.
Well, yes, you should do better, and organizations need to do better at investing in cybersecurity. You can't stick your head into the sand and hope it's not going to happen to you, because hope is not a strategy. But the threat actors, there's this Bruce Lee quote that I always kind of reference when I think about threat actors. And he said, be like water, right? Water always takes the path of least resistance, the easiest way to go down a hill or to get to the lowest point. And threat actors do the same thing, whether it be a nation state or a criminal, whatever the motivation is. These threat actors are looking to find the easiest way to make the most amount of money. And as it turns out, as they move away from ransomware to data extortion, it actually makes things easier for them because they don't have to manage complex cryptographic backends to decrypt files, and they don't have to troubleshoot these tools working or not working. It's really a simple matter of, do you want this data leaked or not? If you don't want it leaked, then you need to pay us.
Adam, stay with me. We'll be back in a minute. I'm talking to Adam Meyers, Senior Vice President of Intelligence at CrowdStrike. Okay, I'm going to bring back to Australia because we recently introduced some legislation focused on critical infrastructure. There's 11 different infrastructure sectors. We're talking about stuff like electricity, gas, ports, water, sewerage, etc. What sort of threats do they face? Because they're not necessarily infrastructure assets with huge amounts of data on individual people or anything like that. So is that more likely to be a ransomware style threat?
We're starting to see an uptick in activity targeting Australia. And I was just in Australia a few weeks ago. I went through Melbourne and Canberra and Sydney. And one of the things that we were conveying to all of the people that we talked to was we're seeing an increase in criminal actors targeting Australia. When we started off, we talked about there's lots of different criminal hustles out there. So, we're talking about ransomware here, but there's also things like business email compromise, which is heavily focused by groups operating out of or with some sort of adjacency to or a nexus to Nigeria. There's these vast criminal enterprises there called confraternities, and they run romance schemes and business email compromise schemes. And there's groups emerging out of China now that are doing, I won't try to butcher the name in Chinese, but it's basically called a pig slaughter, where they go through this effort where they fatten up a target. And one of the things you'll typically get is this errant text message that'll say something along the lines of, "Are you so and so from this?" and people respond, and then they kind of use that as an in to start to build rapport, and then ultimately try to get them into some sort of a crypto scam or something like that, where they can fatten them up by getting them to invest money, start to see profit, and then they take them out. That's called a pig slaughter. And so there's these different scams out there, different schemes. And as we look across the totality of this, we're seeing more and more of this activity targeting Australia. As an example, we've seen one of the types of things that we track are botnets. Botnets are malicious tools, malicious programs that are going to try to steal your bank account information. And in order to steal a bank account information, the tool needs to know about the bank, right? They need to know about what website, I won't mention any Australian banks, but we know who the big ones are, right? And so they need to know about that bank website in order to steal the information as you go to log into it. And we're seeing an increase in botnets over the last couple of months that are, and I'm talking 3 months here, that have begun targeting Australian banks, that have begun targeting businesses in Australia. And so this is a little bit of a diversification, right? After they've hit enough targets in the US, they're looking for other targets they can go after. They're looking for other opportunities to generate revenue. And as they're expanding their footprint, Australia is a natural progression because it's a common language, right? The criminals don't necessarily speak English, but it's easy to go from American English to UK English to Australian English, right? There is a difference, but it's easy for them to go from one to the other versus trying to go from English to Japanese, for example.
Yeah. Well, we're kind of running out of time here, but Adam, I do want to ask you, what should we all be doing, business or individual, to prepare ourselves? Or, I don't know whether, I think all of us would have examples of getting unusual text messages, certainly unusual emails, and I just delete them, and I kind of figure if it's really important and I've deleted something that I shouldn't have deleted, they'll come back to me. That's kind of my theory on it. But how do we prepare ourselves?
That's a great question. And I think, let's think about it from a business, from an enterprise perspective. Organizations really need to start to take security seriously. Basic hygiene, things that we've been talking about in the security industry for the last 20 years still hold true. There's things like the concept of the principle of least privilege, where you only give users access to the amount of information that they need. Well, that's evolved, and today we're advising organizations to move into what we call zero trust and using identity protection, because one of the things that a lot of these breaches have in common is that the threat actor compromises credentials. Either they figure out how to guess the password through something like password spraying, or they've compromised it from some other piece of malware. There's, again, back to that whole e-crime ecosystem. There's groups that focus just on that. And once they get access to the credentials, using identity protection can stop these breaches before they become a problem. So that's one of the things. Another concept that I talk to a lot of people about is implementing things like threat hunting. You can't wait for some alert to fire and then try to figure out what happened a few weeks down the line. Once something is detected, you need to be actively engaged and fighting with those threat actors, those adversaries, in hand-to-hand combat on the endpoint. And so threat hunting is one of the things that enables that. Another thing is to use machine learning and artificial intelligence. A lot of the security tools that have been out there for years, what I would call legacy tools, they rely on signatures. That means that they have to know about a particular threat, write a signature for that threat in order to detect and stop it. With machine learning, we're doing this at scale, and we're looking for, across billions of different files that we've identified as good and bad, now we can start to bring some statistical analysis into it, and machine learning can, at speed, determine if something is good or bad with a very high degree of confidence. So today, that's table stakes, using what would be called next-gen antivirus or something along those lines will really make the difference between finding a threat and not finding a threat. The fourth thing is to use tabletop exercises to drill, to practice, to say, what would happen if we came in today and there was a ransom note, whether it was data extortion or file encryption? What would we do? Who would we call? Do we have outside counsel? And so going through those thought exercises in a conference room or on a Zoom call every month, every quarter, really builds that muscle memory. You play like you practice. Yeah. And if you don't practice, you're going to fall on your face. And then finally, having the intelligence, understanding who these threat actors are, how they operate, what they're after, and how they target organizations like you, how they target organizations in your geographic location, enables you to build accurate and applicable defenses to make sure that you don't become a victim.
Adam, thank you for talking to Fear and Greed.
My pleasure.
That was Adam Meyers, Senior Vice President of Intelligence at CrowdStrike. This is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.